Hi, welcome back to Educator.com's AP Music Theory course. Today's lesson is on triad inversions. So the objectives for today's lesson are to first be able to build triads in first and second inversion, and then we're going to look at using the correct figured bass labeling for these inverted chords. Okay, first let's derive some first inversion triads. Let's start with a root position chord like the ones we've been working with up till now. So I'm just going to write a C major chord here. And when we talk about inversions, what we are concerned with is what note is in the bass voice of the chord. So here we have what we call root position triad, because the root of the chord, the C, which makes it a C major chord, is the lowest voice in the chord. So if we were to invert this chord, which means to shift the disposition of the notes, first we could move this C up to the highest voice, which results in the E, the third of the chord, being the lowest voice in the triad. And this is in fact what we mean when we say first inversion. So in a first inversion chord, the third is the lowest voice. Of course, the voices above that can be in any arrangement. As long as we keep this E in the bass, could have put the C here and the G here. Of course, there's a very wide spacing, but technically this is still first inversion. Let's do one more example with a different kind of chord. How about a minor chord? So I'll start with F minor, root position. And again, we'll invert this by making sure the A flat is the lowest voice and the C and the F above. So here is first inversion. For F minor. Okay, let's move on to second inversion. So we started with C major root position, and then we moved on to first inversion with the third in the bass. And predictably, there's only one note left that we can have in the bass, and that's the G, the fifth of the chord. So when I move the E up top, we have this arrangement, which results in second inversion. So root, first, and second inversion, which I will write equals fifth in bass. And when I say it's in the bass voice, I mean that it's the lowest note of the triad. Let's do this example now with a diminished chord. So let's take the diminished chord in C major, which is, of course, the seventh degree, the triad on the seventh degree. So in C major it would be B, D, F. And here it is in root position. And I'm going to go through the inversions to get to second inversion. So let's first put the D in the bass, and this gives us first inversion. And now with the F in the bass, we have second inversion. And of course, if I wasn't sure which inversion this was in, I could go back, always referencing root position, and see that the F is the fifth of the chord. And that's how I know that it's in second inversion. Okay, let's talk about how we can notate the Roman numerals for these chords and differentiate them between root position first and second inversion. So we've seen that when we write triads diatonically in a key, for instance, going back to C major again, when we have this triad and it's in C, we have a Roman numeral 1, and that's all we need to denote this triad. Now, really, if I wanted to be really precise and write in figured bass symbols for this root position triad, I would add a 5 and a 3 here next to this big Roman numeral 1. And what that means is it's telling me that above the bass voice of this chord, the C, I need to go a third up diatonically and a fifth up diatonically to realize the rest of the harmony. And of course, we don't write these, we're not in the habit of writing these for root position chords because the 5 and 3 are just implied when you have nothing there. So I'll put this in parentheses. But what if we wanted to write this same C major chord in first inversion and have the correct figured bass numerals? So first I'll write the first inversion triad, and now we can derive the correct numerals by looking at what we did here. So here we had a third above the bass and a fifth above the bass. And here we see we have, again, a third above the bass, so I'll put 3 here. And above that we have a sixth above the bass from C to E. So the numerals always refer to the interval above the bass. So 6-3 denotes first inversion triads. Let's do another example in C major. What if we wanted to write the, say, 6 chord in C major as a 6-3? So first let's write it in root position, and then let's do it in first inversion. So, of course, 6th degree of C major is A, so it gives us this A minor triad. And now we want to write it in first inversion, which means that the third is in the bass. And if we forgot what notes to use or how the voices are distributed, we could look here and see that we need to go a third above the bass, which gives us the E, and then a sixth above the bass, which gives us the A. So again, as with most of the material we're dealing with, there's multiple angles with which to attack any kind of problem or question. Okay, let's do second inversion now. And let's move to a minor key. What about A minor, just to keep the key signature simple? So let's look at the first degree in A minor. So we have this A minor triad. And now we want to write it in second inversion, so we know that that means that the fifth is going to be in the bass. So here the fifth is E, so we'll put that in the lowest voice, and then we will add the A and C above that. And again, let's look at the intervals from the bass. So here's the 1, and we have a fourth above the bass, so 4, and then a sixth above the bass. So 6-4 is the bass, figured bass symbols for second inversion. So this was first inversion up here. And here's second inversion. So you can sometimes people refer to first inversion chords as 6-3 chords or 6 chords, and second inversion chords 6-4 chords. And the reason why you can interchange 6-3 and 6 is because in figured bass symbols, if you have a third, it's perfectly fine to omit it. It's always implied that there's going to be a third in the triad, unless, like something like the second inversion chord, it's replaced by a 4. So let's do one more example of a 6-4 chord or a second inversion chord in A minor. Let's take the 5 chord in A. And I'm going to make it a major 5 chord. So instead of the diatonic E, G sharp, and B, it's going to be, or instead of the diatonic E, G natural, and B, excuse me, it's going to be E, G sharp, and B. So here we need to add a sharp to this Roman numeral. And what this really means, since the third is implied, is that the third is being sharped. Now we can understand this. So let's make it second inversion, first of all, by making the fifth of the chord in the lowest voice, and then adding the upper voices as close as possible. And we saw that we had a G sharp, so now we can write the figured bass for this second inversion chord, which would be a 4 again and a 6, except the 6 is sharped, so we add a sharp to the 6. Okay, let's look at some sample problems dealing with first and second inversion triads. Let's say that a certain problem will be that we're in a key like D minor and we're given a 2 chord, which in minor keys is the diminished triad. And the question asks us to write this triad in root position in first inversion and provide the correct Roman numeral and figured bass. So the first thing we need to do is figure out the figured bass symbol. So we know it's going to be a 6th chord, so we can add a 2 diminished 6, and you can write the 3 if you like. It'll probably help you get the right arrangement of voices. And then we can look here and we know that a first inversion chord has the 3rd in the bass, so we keep the G on the bottom and then add the upper voices, so B flat and E. Okay, for a second example, let's say we are just told to build a triad, a 6/3 chord, on some given Roman numeral, so and key. So let's say we start with F major, and we need to supply a 3, 6, 3. Okay, so why don't we start, just to keep it simple, with the 3 chord in F major in root position. So over here, I'll find the 3 chords, so we know that the 3rd degree in F is A. And then we can build the minor triad above that. And of course, F major key signature is just 1 flat, which is on B, so we don't need to worry about the key signature. And now we can take this root position 3 chord that we've got here and turn it into a first inversion. So again, make sure the 3rd is in the lowest voice. And if we want to make sure we've done it correctly, we can make sure that we have a 3rd above the bass from C to E, which we do, and a 6th above the bass from C to A, which we do. Okay, for example 3, let's move on to second inversion chords. And for this question, let's say we are asked, we're given a note, a G, and asked to provide a major second inversion chord above it. So a major 6/4. So in this case, we are not really thinking about, we can do it in 2 ways. We can think about key, or we can think about interval and quality. So let's do it by interval first. So we know we need a 4th above the bass. So we have a C. And then we need a 6th above the bass, which takes us to E. And so now we have the correct second inversion structure, and we need to make sure that it's a major chord. So why don't we do that by looking at what chord this is in root position. So to get it in root position, we write it as closely as possible, so C, E, G. And we see that it's just a C major triad, so what we've done here is correct. We don't need to add any accidentals. The second way we could have done this was to think about what key this chord would occur in. So let's go down here and rewrite the question. Major 6/4 with a G. So first we need to know which voice, or not which voice, but which part of the triad is this. So we know that in a 6/4 chord, the bass is the 5th of the chord. So let's write this G up here, since we know it's the 5th, and go down and spell the rest of the triad. So now we see that the rest of the triad is this C major chord, which works for this problem. So we can go back now and add the C and the E. So 2 different ways to do this problem. Okay, for the last example, let's make another 6/4 chord, and let's say we're asked to do a diminished 6/4 on, let's take the same bass note, G. So now we need to make sure that we're building a diminished chord. Let's do it first by interval. So we know that the 6/4 structure, of course, is a 4th and a 6th above the bass. And just for convenience sake, let's turn this into a root position chord to get the right quality. So starting with no accidentals, this is of course a major chord, and we need it to be a diminished chord. So a few steps in the process. We know that a diminished chord is two minor thirds built on top of each other. So we see that this major chord is of course a minor third and a major third. So we're fine with this minor third on top. Of course, we can't change the G anyway because it was given in the problem. So we need to compact this major third on the bottom by doing something to this C. And of course, we want to make this smaller, so I'm going to add a sharp to the C, which turns this into a minor third. So now I will go back over here and write the correct notes, G, C sharp, and E. And just as a bonus, we can think about which key this chord occurs in. And of course, we know that the diminished triad occurs on the 7th degree of a major key. So C sharp is the root of the chord, which means that it occurs in D major, since 7th degree of C sharp or of D is C sharp, leading to D as the 8th degree. So we can write the correct figured bass for this as D diminished 7, 6, 4. All right, and let's think about, now that we've figured that this chord is in D major, of course, that's the other way we could have answered this question. So thinking about G as the 5th degree of some chord, which gives us G, E, C, and then making sure that this is a diminished triad. And now we see that the root of the chord is a C sharp, and we know that the diminished triad is 7 in some key. And of course, if C sharp is 7, we know a half step above is the root of the key. So that means D. And there we have two ways to come up with this answer. Okay, thanks again for visiting educator.com's Music Theory AP course.